couple things about his storied career. Mike is currently the director of the International Law program at the Naval War College, the Stockton Center for the Study of International Law. But he's also professor at Exeter still. He is he's a fellow at Harvard Law's program on international law and the law of armed conflict. He has degrees from the University of Texas. His LLM is from Yale. He has a master's degree from Naval War College, and he has another master's degree I did not know about from Texas State University. And he has a doctor of literature from Durham University. I'm talking about the other Durham. The real Durham. But I think the important thing about Mike is, Mike, we can always say it was an icy road that got him. He spent 20 years as a judge advocate, and that really has informed his work. As you probably know, Mike's probably the foremost cyber war expert in the world these days, cyber war, emphasizing. But he's also one of the very top law of armed conflict persons, and he has carried the water a lot, in essence, for the United States. And he's written an article, I'm not sure if you're going to mention this, about opinio juris and the decline of opinio juris in the United States, and frankly around the world, where governments aren't expressing their view as much on law of armed conflict issues, and that becomes an issue because you have customary law developing mainly based on what non-governmental agencies and others do. And Mike can correct me if I've summarized his work. But the most interesting thing about his presentation this morning is on targeting is he's just gotten back from Israel and had a first-hand look at the recent war that took place there. And I'm really, really excited. Mike, you have a book coming out on targeting, I understand?
I didn't know that, but...
You do now, Mike, because I'm never wrong. And really, I'm really anxious to hear what he has to say, what the reflections are from, seeing it on the ground. Mike?
I need to get back to Durham to start writing my book on targeting. When Charlie asked me to come here and talk to you all, I asked him what about. He talked about the Forever War, and it seemed to me that an appropriate topic would be some research that we're doing at the Naval War College. Myself and a brilliant young Army Major, J.J. Miriam, who's in our center. We've been taking a look at the Israeli targeting process. I will tell you how this came about. It came about because I'm friends with a number of IDF officers, including the Chief of International Law, and he was asking me, Mike, why is it that they don't love us? We work really, really hard at this targeting thing, yet everyone's always slamming us. And my answer was, well, part of the problem is you're not transparent. When people come to look at what happens in the Second Lebanon War or OPE, you're not very opening to those individuals. You don't show them the extent to which you, for example, try to avoid collateral damage. So what you need to do is not produce yet another report on the operation that says we're Israelis, we're the only democracy in the Middle East, and we do everything right. You need to start letting people objectively look at how you do operations. So that generated an invitation for the War College to go there and do that. We went over in December and looked at the process. We talked with virtually all of the IDF lawyers that are involved in targeting. We talked to the Vice Chief of the Air Staff. We talked to a lot of commanders. We talked to brigade commanders who had conducted operations. We went into their targeting cells in the division that controls operations in Gaza and so forth. And then just a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go back to Israel and verify a lot of things, talk to a lot of their senior leadership like Danny Afroni, who's their MAG, and so forth. So this is the result of those visits and what JJ and I have been doing to analyze it. I will tell you it's a work in progress. So what you're seeing here is just really our first impressions. We will verify all of this with the IDF And so I'd welcome any comments you have so we can refine our observations. I will tell you, I was mentioning to Charlie when he said forever war, and I said Israel is the ultimate forever war. And he kind of hesitated and said, well, maybe some people will debate that. Let me tell you about an experience. A couple of times ago when I was in Israel, I had dinner with a wonderful woman, a very good friend of Bill's, and over dinner she was talking about her experience during the Second Lebanon War. She was pregnant at the time, and because of Hezbollah rockets, they moved all of the pregnant women from the north of the country, up near the border with Lebanon, down to the south. So all pregnant women went south. And they were all at hospitals there. She had her baby there, and she was sitting in the room where the moms nursed the newborn babies. And she said, one of the women that were in the room said, I'm so glad I had a girl. I said, well, why is that? Well, that's because 18 years from now, if I had a boy, that boy would be in Gaza or the West Bank or southern Lebanon. So I'm delighted that I had a girl. And this kind of struck me that that's the way the Israelis think. It is the forever war. It's not a war that may end in a decade. It's a war that will go on forever. Everyone will serve. All Israelis will go to war at some time in their life, which is a really unique approach to warfare, a unique way to look at warfare. So what do we look at? I will go through each of these. We looked first at the context because, of course, the way you target is entirely dependent upon the context, the operational context in which you're conducting targeting. We looked at the targeting systems that the Israelis had. We spent a lot of time looking at the MAG system, the folks that provide legal advice to the targeting process. And then finally, because the Israelis have not been horribly open on their positions with respect to LOAC, with respect to IHL, the law of war, we asked them a lot of questions about what's your view on this? What's your view on that? Do you agree with this provision of the additional protocol? And so I'll be talking about those Israeli views to close up. First of all, the context. It is a really unique context. You must understand that this is a country that has been at war with every single neighbor on their borders at least once since they were founded in 1948. Every single neighbor. And in fact, there are people of great distances that don't like them either, that support conflict against them. And the classic example is, of course, Iran providing support to Hezbollah in the northern part of the country. Moreover, their enemies have evolved. We're no longer talking about ragtag groups of fighters shooting an occasional rocket into Israel. We're talking about a very, very, very well-organized, sophisticated military force in Hamas and Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, that fight like an army. When they fight Hamas or Hezbollah, they're not fighting a bunch of guys with guns. They're fighting a very well-trained, very effective military force. And so all of these factors will affect the way they do targeting. Perhaps the thing that is most influential with respect to their targeting is this. It's geography. It's a really small country. It's shocking if you've never been there how small it is. And I'm from Rhode Island, so I know small when I see it. Okay, this country's, as I have up here, the slide, 263 miles north to south, 45 miles average east to west, but at the point there in the middle, it's only 9.3 miles across the country. On a clear day, you can see across the country of Israel. For the military officers, think what that means in terms of, for example, ground operations. It's a pretty densely populated area. 8 million people are there, lots of population centers. And their most current enemy, Hamas, is in Gaza, which is this little tiny place right here, Gaza, and there are 1.8 million people in Gaza. It's a tiny, tiny place. It is perhaps the most densely populated area in the world, certainly the most densely populated where you've had armed conflict. This geography has a number of consequences. It does give them a huge advantage. If for the War College graduates, command and staff graduates, you know that interior position is a big advantage in warfare because then you can maneuver your forces very easily to meet the threat wherever they are. This geography also drives how they organize to fight. In terms of the Air Force controls every air asset. There's no Israeli Navy air asset. The Army does not have helicopters. It's the Air Force They control everything. Because of this interior position, they need to move their assets around the country. So they control everything. They have highly centralized control of targeting, which I'll talk about in a moment. The ground forces are organized like you would think they are. They have 3 theaters of operation, southern Lebanon with Hezbollah, West Bank and Gaza, so they have a northern, central, and southern regional command. And there they do decentralized targeting because they're fighting different enemies in each case. Now, geography is the big factor for the military planning, but this is the big factor. When you go to Israel, no matter where you are in rocket range of somebody, either Hamas or Hezbollah. We have Hamas on the left, Hezbollah on the right. The entire country, every person in the country is subject to mortar fire or some form of rocket fire, and this drives their targeting in a huge way. The result is that they are extremely sensitive to the dangers faced by the population. In virtually every conversation, they would say, Mike and JJ, but you must understand, my wife is within range of the rockets I'm targeting. We had lots of conversations like that. To give you a feel, just 1 month in the most recent conflict, 1 month, there were 3,000 strikes into Israel in a single month. Their enemies understand that they're very sensitive to the risk faced by their population, and so their enemies exploit this in a big way. Their enemies cannot possibly defeat the IDF in the classic battle. It is impossible. And so what they've done is they must have a Hamas war college. They look for another center of gravity. That other center of gravity is, of course, the Israeli civilian population. And that's why they target the Israeli civilian population, because they can't take on the IDF in any way. And so for the Israelis, they spend a lot of time going after rockets, rocket launchers, and so forth. For the Israelis, a single rocket launcher is a strategic operation. It's a strategic objective. It's not for the military officers. We would be thinking of rockets as tactical or perhaps operational level objectives. That's not the case for them. Every rocket is a strategic objective. Now, the IDF is a very different military than our own. It's not an expeditionary military. They fight at home. I mean, they literally drive to the war. So the chief of international law will perhaps get a call at home, and instead of going into Tel Aviv, he just drives his car the other way and he goes down to Gaza into a targeting cell and takes a look. So it's a very different sort of military. Most people serve, males and females, males for 32 months, females for 28 months. And when they fight, they're basically a reserve army. They have a core active duty army, but they're supplemented by the reserves, by the conscripts. This makes them, for an American, shockingly sensitive to casualties. The value that they place on an individual soldier is huge relative to what we do in terms of proportionality. Because what you need to understand is that soldier isn't some kid from Schertz, Texas. That soldier is the neighbor's kid, or it's their kid, or it's their nephew. And so when it is, for them, the soldier is held in enormous regard. For example, prisoner exchanges. They will exchange a single soldier that's been captured for hundreds and hundreds of enemy fighters. This is currently very controversial with Israel. There's a big debate going on about this now. They also have a directive, a famous directive called the Hannibal Directive, that basically says if one of our soldiers gets captured by Islamic Jihad, whoever, we're going to take off the gloves. We are going to go get that soldier back, period. And so they've received a lot of criticism. They actually conducted one of these operations, Hannibal Directive operations, during Operation Protective Edge, OPE, and it has received a lot of criticism because they went in an impressive way to get that guy back. The other thing is that because they're so concerned about the soldiers, the enemy now perceives that an individual soldier for the IDF is also a center of gravity. So the enemies of Israel, one of their strategic objectives is to capture a single soldier. That's a strategic objective, because when one soldier is captured, the entire country mobilizes. It makes the front page of the newspaper and so forth. So they built all of these tunnels into Israel. During OPE, they discovered 32 of these tunnels. They're very impressive. They are 25 to 40 meters deep. They can run up to 3 kilometers long. You can drive motorcycles through them. They have electricity, communications, and so forth. The objective of the tunnels is not only to infiltrate Israel to conduct combat operations, but to snag a soldier. That's why they have the motorcycle, by the way, because they want to snag a single soldier and then get back through the tunnel into Gaza so they can secure the soldier. So they see individual soldiers as centers of gravity, not major fielded forces, but the single guy. Now, move to the second issue, which is how do they conduct targeting. Ground targeting, air targeting, very, very different. The ground targeting is primarily tactical targeting against what they call time-critical targets. These are dynamic emerging targets. They're targets that have just popped up on the scope. Okay, they're not pre-planned. They don't identify the target and say, in our targeting cycle, which is for them 24 hours, we're going to strike that target. These are targets that they see the guy on the motorbike going down the road. It's that kind of target. Or they see the truck with the rocket on the back of it pull up next to an apartment building. So these will be taken on by the ground forces. As I mentioned, we did visit the Southern Command's Gaza headquarters, went into the targeting cells. In terms of JAGs, or as they say, in terms of MAGs, they have one attorney that is assigned full-time to a division, a single attorney for the Army guys. This is unthinkable. One attorney assigned to the division, and when that division goes into combat, they will supplement with a number of attorneys, 3 or so attorneys. They're all reservists. Irrespective of the rank, the active duty guy is in charge for the targeting. They have multiple attack cells. It's classified how many they have, but they have, in any division, they will have a series of attack cells, which are nothing more than little rooms, okay, with lots of connectivity. And the rooms are divided along functional, geographic, and threat-based lines. In other words, for example, one cell may own helicopter assets. They're owned by the Air Force, but they will task the Air Force to provide helicopter support. Sometimes they are divided geographically, so you take this village, we'll take this other village and watch it. And sometimes they're organized on a threat-based fashion. So, for example, you may have a cell dedicated exclusively to the rocket fight. In the cell, it's a small cell. It's not a big air operations center. It's a little tiny cell. There's a commander, usually in the rank of major. He's the guy that gives the go-ahead because they operate autonomously, so the major's pulling the trigger every time. There is a targeting officer in there who does, what kind of weapon do we want to use, et cetera, and so forth. And then there are a number of intelligence officers from different Israeli organizations. It's classified, but different Israeli organizations, so they can fuse their intelligence on a particular target. There is no JAG or MAG in the targeting cell. The legal support is provided at the division level. So that guy is taking dynamic targets and saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, on his own with no legal support. The only time he would have legal support is in the event that he says, I'm not too sure about this, go find the MAG, who in the rank of a major at the division. I will tell you that Major Miriam and I were surprised by this, and at a recent conference, a number of other folks were surprised by this. There's certainly no legal obligation to have that lawyer there, because the legal obligation under classic LOAC is to have them at the division level, not at the cell level. But we were surprised that they did not have someone in the room providing legal advice. The air picture is entirely different. It's completely centralized. Everything happens from Tel Aviv, from a single ops center. They take on most of the pre-planned targets. They operate at a much faster pace than we do. They have 24-hour targeting cycles and can move much more quickly than that when necessary. They go through a number of phases, or there are a number of processes. The first process is target development, and that's where they decide what to strike. For the air guys in the room, you know that we have certain lists. They also have a master target list that's continually evolving as the fight evolves. So they're continually identifying targets, adding those targets onto the list. They conduct effects-based operations like we do. They're not trying to take out, they're not trying to attrit the enemy, wear the enemy down. Instead, what they're trying to do is conduct attacks that have particular effects that are thought by the commander, so they're very much like us. During this process, they will identify any intelligence gaps that they have with respect to a particular target. What's that? And they will then task that intelligence request out to whatever organization can find the information. And here they do have extensive JAG or MAG experience. In the aftermath of the Second Lebanon War in 2007, there was a lot of criticism of the IDF on the way they conducted that operation, so they created something called the OLA, Operational Law Apparatus. It's a group of lawyers who provide around-the-clock advice to the Air Force as they conduct these operations. What is interesting for those of you in uniform is the lawyer has a red card. It's the lawyer who says go, no go, or you can only go with conditions. So the lawyer will say, it's an actual sheet, and that they fill out, and it says proportionality. I mean, there are a lot of things on the sheet, but after they do the sheet, they say, okay, possible, which means you're good to go, conditional, which means you're good to go under certain conditions. For example, you use only a certain weapon, or you're striking only during a certain time, or only with a certain type of system to monitor the engagement. And then a lawyer can say, absolute red card. You're not going to do that. That's an unlawful strike. It's disproportionate or whatever. The commander can appeal that up the chain, but it keeps coming over to the MAG. So he may appeal it up to the chief of staff, but the chief of staff will then go to the military advocate general. So a lawyer always has the final call on the legality of a particular operation. The other thing they do, like we do, is a target assessment. It's not only what to strike, but it's how to strike it. This is something that occurs throughout the entire process, all the way through bomb damage assessment. They're doing the same thing that we would do. You're assessing whether any special protection needs to be given to the target. They're trying to assess collateral damage at this phase. This is where they do the weaponeering. What type of weapon am I going to use against that target? What type of tactics am I going to use? As I come into the target area, are there particular things I need to be concerned about? So I may need to have a different angle of attack, for example. They do something that's interesting. They, in advance, and they monitor it very, very carefully, dead space. Dead space, they have weapons, not all of the weapons, but they have weapons like we do, that you can fly the weapon away after it's been launched. So you're watching the engagement. You see civilians come into the area. You have the ability to control the weapon and fly it. So they identify the spaces where they don't think there are going to be civilians or civilian objects to which they can fly that weapon into, so it doesn't hurt anyone. And they monitor that continuously. They're continually updating dead spaces around targets. We were, frankly, surprised at the extent to which they understood their environment, but they've been fighting in that environment in a period measured in decades. They have great intelligence assets. Remember, they used to actually be in Gaza, and so they understand the environment well. They know what that building is and the building next to it. They know how many stories. They know if civilians live in it. I mean, they have extraordinary understanding of the target area, and throughout this process, the operational law apparatus is very involved. And then, of course, they engage, just like us, in pre-strike controls, verifying the target, and ensuring that it remains a military objective. Remember, their operations are often urban, so a lot of the time their targets are civilian objects that have become military objectives through use, because they put weapons in there, they're using it as a command and control facility. So they're continually watching the targets to ensure that they retain their status as a military objective at the time they engage the target. They're continually reassessing proportionality, monitoring that. To the extent they can, they will seek continuous visual observation of the target, because if you're going after targets that have become military objectives by use, you need to make sure they're still being used. So to the extent they have assets, and they have fewer assets than we thought they did, they will maintain observation. And then I'll talk about it in a moment. They warn in a way that you would not believe. It stunned us. I mean, I knew it in advance, but JJ, it's the first time, and we spent a lot of time going, you got to be kidding me. And I'll explain that in just a second. But this is not dissimilar to us. Third thing we looked at was the Military Advocate General Corps. How are they organized to provide legal advice? This is the organization of the Corps. The important, for our purposes, the important one is the International Law Department, because the International Law Department provides not only the type of international law advice that your ops and international law departments provide today, but they actually provide and control all advice given during an armed conflict. It's all centralized. So the guy down at division and his reservists report up to the colonel who's at the international law division. All the legal advice during both peacetime and wartime is provided by that single department. They're actually in the rating chain. So the guy at the division reports to the International Law Department's colonel. Additionally, they have a military justice section. The military justice section has a special team that focuses on operational incidents. They have special training so that when something happens, they don't just send out someone that does military justice. They activate the team goes out there and looks at the incident. They are a group of 1,000 attorneys, but only 300 of them are active duty. So when the fight's on, they activate whoever they need, but you can have a 2-to-1 ratio of reservists to active duty if they really are in a big fight. The Military Advocate General, this is him, Danny Afroni. I knew Danny. He's just a wonderful guy, a man of extraordinary character and extraordinary talent. He's appointed by the Minister of Defense, not the Chief of Staff. And this is to ensure the independence of the MAG from the operational chain, because he's overseeing the legality of the operational chain. And professionally, he's subordinate not to the Chief of Staff, but rather to the Attorney General of Israel, who has the final vote. Everyone in the MAG, everyone reports only through MAG chains. There's never a point where a MAG will report to an operational guy. The MAGs absolutely control the decision to investigate and prosecute, so it's not the commander. You don't have general court-martial convening authorities and so forth. It's all done in the MAG department, and in fact, Danny is de facto the general court-martial convening authority. And as I've mentioned, the MAGs have an absolute red card on targeting. The MAG can say, that's a no strike, you can't go. What also struck us, I had dinner with the former President of the Supreme Court, Judge Barak. What also struck us was that the Supreme Court in Israel is a court of the first instance during an armed conflict. And they regularly hear petitions regarding ongoing military operations. And in many cases, they have actually issued injunctions that say, stop X, stop what you're doing. They will call a commander from the field. Major General, whoever, division commander, I know you're busy, but we'd like you to come and appear before the court in this first instance case. So we thought, in fact, not only us, but at a recent conference, everyone thought, you got to be kidding me. In the middle of a conflict, some judge says, I'd like to see the brigade commander up here with his targeting officer and bring a lawyer along. This is very common in Israel, very common. And on a number of occasions, they have said, you can't continue to do this operation anymore. You can't engage in this tactic anymore. They have a new investigation process. Remember that I said that the MAG was involved in investigations. He was the one that decided whether to investigate and whether to prosecute. This is their new system. It is a product of a report called the Report of the Turco Commission. The Turco Commission was convened in order to assess an incident in which some Israeli IDF guys boarded a Turkish vessel that was trying to breach the blockade of Gaza. There was a little bit of a gunfight and some people were hurt. So it was a major investigation. Actually, I was one of the legal advisors to it. There was a little-known second investigation second report issued by the Turco Commission on the Israeli investigative process. They've changed many of their procedures to comply with the recommendations set forth in this report. And so this is the system today. They get a complaint from wherever. It could come from a human rights group. It could come from a MAG. Because remember, the MAG's not working for the commander. So the MAG can dime the commander out pretty quick. That's his job. And so the MAG gets a complaint from wherever, yes, and he will then do one of two things. He will either send it to a criminal investigation, or he will send it to a new thing called the fact-finding assessment. This is a small group of very senior people, often led by a major general, a reservist with operational experience, that looks into a particular incident and then generates a report. It has legal advice. The reports, in both cases, are given to the MAG, which then decides to do one of three things. Close the case, because there's nothing there, send the case to one of the units for disciplinary measures, or issue an indictment. In the most recent operation, OPE, Protective Edge, there have been already over 50 fact-finding assessments. Some occur during the conflict, some occur after. There have been over 50. There are 15 criminal investigations. Of those, 10, the MAG said directly, let's investigate. In 5 of those, he looked at the results of the FFA and said, okay, now I want to do the more robust criminal investigation. No indictments yet, but it's still pretty soon. And the thing that everyone's talking about right now in Israel is there was a Hannibal directive operation. Remember, this is the operation where they got one of your guys, so you're going to roll in there and get the guy back no matter what it takes. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's the effect of it. There was one in Rafah. They went in, they used artillery. They used artillery to box the area in because they knew that the guy was there and they did not want Hamas to take the guy away, because once he's gone in an urban area, it's hard to find him. So they knew where he was, and they used a lot of artillery to create a box within which they could trap Hamas and their guy, and there were a lot of casualties, 114 casualties. There's been no decision to conduct a criminal investigation, but it's on Danny Afroni's desk. He's trying to decide what to do with that now. Received a lot of international attention. What's our impression of this system? I have to tell you, and I mean no offense to General Rockwell and the others, but these are the best operational lawyers in the world. I've worked with operational lawyers from Norway, Denmark, UK, a little bit with the United States Air Force. And without, I'm absolutely convinced that these guys are the best. I mean, they had captains that could teach at Duke Law School, could take General Dunlop's job tomorrow. Okay, so they were. But they wouldn't know what to do with the snow either. So we were extraordinarily impressed by every single individual we met. And I don't think they were feeding us the smart guys, because the International Law Department is rather small and we were there. So I met virtually everyone in the group. Very, very impressive. A downside, in my view, is that MAGs are not seen as part of the team in the way that you are. If you're a major in the Army, you're part of that unit. You work out with the guys, you go to the O Club with the guys, you are a key member of the staff. My boss is a 2-star SEAL, and I was just talking with him the day before yesterday about lawyers in the fight in JSOTF operations. I see Matt here who's done this. He was describing to me how the lawyer sits at the front bench. He says, this guy's really key to me. I've got my command sergeant major, I've got my ops guy, I've got my intel guy, and I've got my JAG. And in many cases, that JAG is just a major, but nothing wrong with being a major, is a major, not just a major, we're getting old, is a major. But this guy is one of the key members of the staff. That is not the case in the IDF, not at all. The way I described it to my friend Danny is, Danny, I'm a Catholic. You know, a priest walks into a room and I'm going to confess something. I'm nervous. I'm watching what I'm doing. It's kind of like that. It's like a priest is walking into a room full of Catholics. On the other hand, the benefit of the process is they are really no kidding independent. No kidding independent. And what they say goes. And so although you're not a member of the team and you don't necessarily have the commander's confidence in the way a U.S. Army officer would, an IDF officer, they know they need to stay clean because that guy's watching what they're doing. So that was the upside of this. We were impressed with the commanders we met. The commanders, this is one of them right here. This is the commander of the Gaza division, a very, very impressive and very scary guy. But he was obviously an incredible professional, very impressive officer. But we met some brigade commanders, we met air commanders. The one thing that struck Major Miriam and myself was the extent to which they were confident in their ability to apply the law. I mean, you know, you talk to an American commander, and the American commander loves his JAG. They'll go on and on about a critical part of the team, blah, 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 blah. You don't get that from Israeli commanders. I had a major who runs a targeting cell say to us, I asked him, you don't have access to a lawyer. Well, I'm trained in law. I can read the ROE. If I have a question, I'll wander down the hall and ask the guy. For an American, that was a little bit strange, okay? But they are good. The IDF commanders are pretty good. And we really had a sense that risk to population and soldiers, those were the big drivers in their targeting decisions. We need to protect the population. We need to protect our individual soldiers. That's what determined what was going on. So let's change to the last topic, which is the law. Where are they in terms of the law? Well, they're a party to most of the conventions that we're a party to. They're listed up here, Geneva Conventions and so forth. They also agree that the Hague 4 annexed regulations are customary. They are not a party to the additional protocol 1 for international armed conflict or 2 for non-international armed conflict, like we are not a party to that. So that was a big issue. To what extent do they find the provisions of the additional protocols to be customary law? And the answer is a lot. They're like us. Most of the additional protocol provisions on targeting, that's the big convention on targeting, they say, yeah, that's customary law, so Israel's bound, not because as a matter of treaty, but as a matter of customary international law. We did raise some questions about some controversial provisions. The first one we talked to them about were reprisals. A reprisal, I mean, most people in the audience know, but a reprisal is an operation that you conduct that would be unlawful, but for the fact the enemy has engaged in unlawful conduct, and you're doing this in order to force the enemy back into compliance with the law. So they're attacking your civilians. It happens a lot in Israel. So what you do is you attack their civilians, and you tell them, knock it off. And we're going to continue to attack your civilians until you stop attacking ours. That's illegal for additional Protocol 1 states, like most of NATO. But the United States takes the position that we reserve the right to conduct reprisals against the civilian population. We asked the Israelis about that, and I assumed they would say, yeah, we agree with you 100%, particularly since that's the major strategic objective. Their population is an enemy center of gravity, it's a center of gravity. But they would give us no opinion whatsoever. I'm guessing that's for political reasons. They don't want some pointy neck geek lawyer from Rhode Island writing that they agree you can target the enemy population. So I think they just, for political reasons, did not say you Americans are right. With regard to the natural environment, like us, they do not believe that the provisions on the natural environment, which prohibit widespread, long-term, severe damage to the environment, are binding on them. But they did say, and I thought this was interesting, they did say with respect to the natural environment, that's a civilian object. So if you're conducting operations and you're going to harm the natural environment, you have to factor that into proportionality. I thought this was interesting that they were willing to admit that. We had an interesting discussion regarding perfidy. Remember, perfidy is the rule of LOAC, of IHL, that says I can't use feigned protected status in order to kill, wound, or capture the enemy. So I can't pretend I'm a civilian in order to attack the judge, okay? For many scholars, I happen to be one of them, we believe that perfidy extends to kill and wound, but not capture. It's some nerdy lawyer reason, has to do with an earlier treaty and so forth. But we're pretty sure it doesn't encompass the notion of I feign protected status in order to capture someone. They agreed, which surprised me because remember, one of their big concerns is that someone's going to snag one of their soldiers. So I would have thought they would have taken the other decision. For the young lawyers in the audience, I would remind you that the United States does accept capture as part of perfidy. That's based on a manual, a naval warfare manual called the Commander's Handbook that encompasses this. I want to believe, since my office produces it, that we do that as a matter of policy and not law. We also talked to them. They have a number of units that traditionally stay in civilian clothing. These are called Mistaravim, if I've said that right. We talked to them about that. They are of the same view as we are, that the wear of civilian clothing is not a violation of the law of armed conflict. unless you're wearing that civilian clothing in perfidious conduct in order to capture in order to kill or wound the enemy. I think this is the right answer. Military objectives, of course, this is the big issue in targeting. Am I shooting at something that I legally can shoot at? This is the rule in the additional protocol. If something is by nature, location, purpose, or use, gives the enemy an effective contribution, and if you take it out, it's going to give you a definite military advantage, then it's a military objective. They accepted this, we accept this, everyone accepts this. For them, we were struck by the extent it's logical, by the extent to which they really focus on the use and purpose provisions, not so much military nature. Not so much because normally you fight an enemy military and they're identified as the military, but for their enemies, the big concern is going after civilian objects that have become military objectives because the apartment in the building has been used for military purpose or military reasons. And purpose, which is the rule that says something doesn't have to be currently used to become a military object, but you have to know it's going to be used. And for them, this has become a big issue because of this. This is one of the tunnels, very much like the one that we went into a couple weeks ago. If you look, the tunnel is all reinforced. See these concrete slabs? It's all reinforced. By the way, this tunnel is 3 kilometers long. 3 kilometers, unbelievable. And so what they do is they build these concrete reinforcement pieces, in this case, Gaza, and then just bring them into the tunnel. As they dig, they reinforce as they go along. And so the IDF noted, well, that makes concrete or concrete production facilities targets by virtue of purpose, because that concrete will be converted into something that is military. We agreed with that, but this is something Americans don't worry too much about the purpose criterion. They do a lot. We talked to them about the war-sustaining debate. For many of you in the audience, you will know there's a long-standing debate between the Americans and pretty much everyone else over what qualifies as a military objective. The whole world agrees if it's war fighting, a tank, a ship, these are war fighting, they are clearly military objectives. And everyone agrees in the world that things can be war supporting. So for example, a munitions factory supports the war effort, it builds the munitions. But the Americans have taken the approach, in one of our manuals, again it's the Navy manual, that if an object is war sustaining, it is also a military objective. What's a war sustaining object? It's an object which, or an entity that provides the funding, the support necessary to carry on the war effort. So in the Middle East, for example, you have many states where oil export provides all of the funding necessary to carry on their war effort. For the United States, the oil export, things associated with the oil export industry would be a lawful target. Doesn't mean you're going to go after them, but means it falls within the realm of lawful targets. The Israelis agree. Their enemies don't have such industries, any such industries that would qualify, but they came up with an interesting issue which I've never thought about. What they said was, listen, Mike, you know, we don't have any of those, but we do have cash. Cash? Yeah, because the enemies of Israel, they're on a cash economy. You know, you don't transfer funds to an arms dealer. You know, we want to buy some arms in, I don't know, the Czech Republic, and transfer some funds. Everything is done with cash. And they say, sometimes we know where that cash, I mean stacks of money, we know where that is. And can we take it out? If you're an advocate of the war-sustaining approach, the answer is absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, taking out that cash would be a big dent in their operations. For those who don't agree with it, I happen to be one of them. If you don't agree with it, you can still take out the cash if you know that the cash is going to be used for a particular operation because there's such a close nexus to the strike. You can also take out the cash, and this is important, if it's been transferred to, for example, the military wing of Hamas. So it's not sitting out there someplace else in Gaza, but the military wing has the cash and they're using it. Then it becomes a military objective clearly, and you can take it out. The IDF, they're struggling with this. I could not get a straight answer, and I don't think they have one. I think they're trying to decide what the answer is. They were also unwilling to offer an opinion on 2 other issues which are very interesting. If you're involved in urban combat, you will often, and they said they had this situation a lot, you will often have a situation where you get intelligence that's like this. We know weapons are stored at the building in the corner of the village. But then when you look at the village, this is a village, you look at the corner, you say, what corner? Which one of these is this? So you narrow it down to, say, 3 buildings. Could be 4, could be 2. And the question is can you strike those 3 buildings? One view says, yes, you can, because one of them is a military objective. So you do your calculation like this. You say, I'm going to make the 2 that create the greatest collateral damage. We're going to make those civilian in my assessment. And the 3rd one, we're going to make military. And then you do your proportionality analysis and so forth. The alternative view says, no, when you pull the trigger, you don't have reasonable certainty that the target that weapon's going to strike is a military objective. You don't know. You just know it might. In fact, you have a 1 in 3 chance of being, only 1 in 3 chance of being right. This is a big debate. They would offer no opinion on this, although they kept raising it. It was like, what's the answer, Mike? So then the other issue that came up was lines of communication. There's a long-standing debate. For those of us who were involved in the air and missile warfare, Harvard's Air and Missile Warfare Manual, this was a big one. A line of communication is something like a road, a railway, an airport, a port facility. These are lines of communication. And the question is, if you have a major line of communication, is it by nature a military objective? Because if it is, you just go after it. It's a military objective, subject to proportionality and so forth. Or does it only become a military objective by use of purpose? When you know that there's vehicles that are going down it or going to go down it. They would offer no opinion on this, although it's a critical issue for them, not in Gaza, but in Lebanon. Because in Lebanon, if you remember the war, they took out Beirut International Airport, and they were dropping bridges all over the country, so it's a major issue. Do you have to know that that line of communication is being used or is going to be used, or is it good enough that it's a major line of communication? They have no answer on this. Of course, if you're fighting in an urban area, the big issue is, of course, civilians, because civilians are often caught up in the conflict. They have a binary approach to qualification. They only see 2 categories. You're either a civilian or you're a member of the armed forces. There is no 3rd category like unlawful combatants or whatever. It's just civilians or members of an armed force. And this raises the issue of when can you go after those civilians in this binary? When can you go after those civilians who are somehow involved in the fight? And this raises the issue of direct participation. Direct participation, there is a rule in LOAC, in IHL, there is a rule that says, listen, if you're a civilian, you enjoy all these protections, can't be attacked, proportionality, blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, if you directly participate in hostilities, you lose those protections for such time as you are so participating. Very important rule, was the subject of a major study done by the ICRC, a 5-year study. I was one of the international experts that was involved in this study, and so I could give a lecture on the study itself. I hear the laughter. It was an interesting event. Eventually it broke down, and then there were these groups of 12, the Dirty Dozen, that withdrew from the process. I was one of the Dirty Dozen anyways. That need not detain us. But a major issue that we struggled with in the ICRC study was how do we treat this for such time phrase? What does that mean? Does that mean if this not a civilian? If that not a civilian, does that mean if this civilian is a member of a group and she fights on a regular basis for the group, but she's a civilian? What does for such time mean? Do I have to wait till she goes out and engages me, or can I kill her when she's sleeping in her bed at night? So, as we were dealing with this issue, this very controversial issue, we would never do that. As we were dealing, you look nervous, and I don't know if this is your husband or your friend, but he looked nervous too. It's just the hypothetical, okay? Huh?
I sleep near her.
Okay, sleep near. Sleep in the other room, if for no other reason. Okay. So, while we were engaged in this study, the Supreme Court of Israel, in a famous opinion rendered by Justice Barak, came out, the case is called the Targeting Killing case, and said, listen, if a civilian is a member of an armed group, they are continuously participating. They are targetable throughout that period of participation. The ICRC would not buy into this approach. I thought it was a rather good approach. The ICRC would not buy into this approach, and eventually the group agreed on a concept called organized armed groups, borrowed from another part of the law. And what it says is that an organized armed group, they're not civilians. they're like the armed forces. You treat them like armed forces, which means they're targetable around the clock, like a regular member of the military. However, like Hamas, the military wing of Hamas, or Hezbollah. However, in a complicated process, they added on a clause that was called the CCF clause. And the CCF stands for Continuous Combat Function. So they said, yes, a group like Hamas is like the military, targetable all the time, but only those members of the group that have a continuous combat function. So the ICRC met us halfway. Now you have some members of the group that are like the armed forces, targetable all the time, don't worry about the for such time, but then other members of the group that aren't. Now, Israel, that was not their approach because of their Supreme Court opinion. Very surprisingly, they have changed. Well, I was surprised. I was stunned. They've changed. They said, well, that court decision was nice, but circumstances have changed. Today, the nature of Hamas and Hezbollah is such that they really are an armed force. I mean, they're just like an armed force. They wear uniforms, they're armed, they have commanders, and so forth. So today, at least the IDF, I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to say, but the IDF accepts the notion of organized armed groups, and they wisely, in my view, reject the concept of CCF. So if you're a member of a group, the purpose of the group being to fight, everyone's targetable in that group, every single person. They also take a very broad view of the acts that would qualify as direct participation. There was a major debate during the proceedings over the issue of IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And the ICRC said that if you were making IEDs, that was in direct participation, and an IED maker could not be targeted. Of course, a lot of us pushed back on that. The Israelis take the view that we have, that would be direct participation, and it's relevant in their context because not all the rockets come from Iran. A lot of the rockets are, short-range rockets, are homemade. And so the Israelis want to go after those who are producing those rockets. I think that's a right view of the law. They deal with human shields every single day. Often, shielding in these conflicts is encouraged, sometimes forced, but encouraged. And in fact, the Israelis give a lot of warnings of their strikes. And when they do, their enemies use the warnings to know where to send civilians so they can shield. So they've got a real problem. Again, this was a huge debate in the DPH process. What the Israelis say is that if you're a civilian like this is a classic example. This is a bunch of people, a bunch of civilians waving flags on top of a building. After the building has been warned, there's been a warning of attack against the building, everyone goes on top of the building. The Israelis take the position that those individuals are participating in hostilities, so they are not protected. This doesn't mean the Israelis want to target them. What it means is the Israelis do not want to factor them into the proportionality analysis. I happen to think that's the right view. I know Andrew's here from the ICRC. The ICRC takes the other view and says that a civilian can't forfeit his or her civilian status. Both of these views are reasonable. With regard to involuntary shields, we've had lots of talk about even if you're an involuntary human shield, the other side should not get to benefit from their unlawful conduct. So if you force human shields on top of that building, happens a lot. There will be a warning and they won't let them leave the neighborhood. Okay, so they're involuntary human shields. There is a view that those individuals don't count in proportionality to deprive the enemy of the ability to do this. There is a view that they count, but they're discounted. That's not the Israeli view. The Israeli view is they're civilians. And then there was an issue of refusing to heed warnings. Many times the Israelis will give a warning, and the people will just go, well, that's nice, and stay right where they're at. This can be an individual strike, or it can be a general warning to evacuate an area. They just stay put. So the issue is, are they voluntary shields? Because they're there, and they're there voluntarily. The Israelis said that is not their position. They remain civilians. They're factored into all the proportionality equations. You will often see situations where the Israeli enemies will put military objectives and fighters in or near buildings. They have a generally reasonable approach to this. If a building is used for military purposes, it becomes a military objective. There is the question of what part of the building, because a lot of these are tall apartment buildings, and you may only have 1 or 2 apartments used by the enemy. So does that mean the entire building is the military objective, or just those apartments if you have the ability to surgically strike those apartments? And it's important because you're asking, do I need to factor in damage to the building into my collateral damage assessment? For the Israelis, the whole building is a military objective, although curiously, and I still don't understand this, and I think they must have misspoken, they said, but all the stuff inside the building is civilian. So the building is not civilian, but the furniture and the 48-inch TV, those have to be factored into the proportionality calculation. I don't know whether that opinion will survive their scrub of our work. Proximity, they again take an approach that is protective in terms of civilians. If you move a rocket launcher next to a building, that building retains its civilian status. The only exception is where you're using the building for military purposes, like you're using the building to shield from a strike. In that case, it's a military objective because now the building is being used for military purposes. But if you're just driving next to buildings, they retain their civilian status. Let me skip that slide and go to proportionality in light of time. Obviously, if you're engaged in an urban fight, proportionality is an incredible issue. I mean, virtually every strike occurs near civilian objects or civilians. In Protective Edge, just to give you an example, they launched 5,000 strikes. 5,000 strikes. Number of deaths are estimated at 2,200. Of these, about 1,500 are believed to be military and the remainder civilian. They have lots of capability to assess collateral damage. There is the problem that they're no longer present in Gaza, which to some extent ties their hands. The other thing that surprised us was I thought they would have drones. They would have persistent capability, coverage of the target area. That's not the case. They have lots of drones, but they use an awful lot of their drones because of the tunnel threat. So they're flying over Israel, looking for insurgents that have penetrated Israel, looking for tunnel entrances and so forth. So although they seemingly have lots of drones, all of those drones are not available to verify the target and to look for collateral damage. And for the military guys, they don't have a CDIM process. There's nothing nearly as sophisticated as what you guys do. Collateral damage, again, it's high into an urban area. They are very, very, very restrictive in terms of protecting the civilians. Their rules of engagement are much more restrictive than they need to be as a matter of law. Much, much, much more restrictive. And although there's been a lot of talk about artillery, we talked to them operationally. JJ's an Army officer, so he knows a little bit about this. They use artillery only for artillery is less precise sometimes, but they use it only for very limited purposes, like blocking in a place where someone has been caught. And they have also identified in Gaza alone, little Gaza, they've identified 2,000 sites that are either on a no strike or a restricted strike. In other words, you can't hit it, or before you hit it, you have to get high-level approval. Again, when we were looking at it, a lot of military advantage to protecting the civilian population, a lot of military advantage into the equation for force protection. We asked them the question about Iron Dome. This was very interesting, and perhaps I'll stop here to allow questions. We asked them the question about Iron Dome, because Iron Dome is really effective. Iron Dome will engage rockets that are inbound to urban areas. So if a rocket's coming in and they think it's going to hit a field, they let the rocket go. But if it's coming into an urban area, they'll engage it. And I thought it was 80, but I heard a couple weeks ago they estimate 95% intercepts. So my law professor brain kicked in and said, wow, if you're taking out 95% of your inbound rockets, that means that the military advantage of going after a single rocket drops a lot, which means that you can't cause as much civilian damage or casualties to the civilian population. In other words, military advantage down, so you can't countenance that. They were quick to say, absolutely not. You've got that wrong, Schmitt. That's not the law. And what they said was, what you have to assess is you have to assess if the rocket does get through. The military advantage is if that rocket penetrates the Iron Dome and hits Tel Aviv or Haifa or whatever, what will that cause? I think that's a reasonable approach. I think we're in a reasonable, people differ view. So in light of time, let me Let me talk one moment about warnings, and then I just sum up and ask a question or two. The warnings are extraordinary, extraordinary. The IDF drops general leaflets that say, we're going to conduct operations in this area, evacuate to that area. The IDF phones people. This is very weird. You know, hello, Ahmed, this is Moshi. You know, we're gonna drop a bomb on your building in 14 minutes, get everyone out of the building if the building is a military objective. Obviously, they don't do that if they're going after an individual, because he would go, well, maybe I should leave too. They do text messaging. So you'll get a text that says, you need to leave the building because we're going to blow it up, a text message. They do what is called roof knocking. So if all of these other systems fail, they'll fire a shell at the top of the roof that has low explosive, but it makes a big bang to scare people out of the building. This is way beyond what the law requires, and it's also proven problematic. Because as soon as you warn, then civilians appear. So there are some human rights groups that are saying today it is a violation of law of armed conflict to warn, because that means the civilians will go to the place. So, I mean, this is a real problem. But they warn well beyond what the law. What are our impressions? Extremely professional operators, extremely professional MAGs. The MAGs are a key part of the team, or have a key role in the process, but are not part of the team. There are positive and negatives. We were surprised by the extent to which commanders do not rely upon their JAGs. We felt that the way they assist, it was understandable, but the risk to the civilian population and to an individual soldier was a huge factor in proportionality, precautions, and so forth. Because Charlie Dunlap is here, I have to say this. They are very sensitive to lawfare. You're like a god there, Charlie, okay? They understand their enemies are engaging in lawfare, and so many of the rules of engagement, most of them, are designed to deprive the enemy of lawfare opportunities, and their system far exceeds. I think I have time for... I don't want to know what the next part of this sentence is, because I've known him for a long time. Yes, sir, Marty.
See, I'm flexible. So let me start.
Flexibility is the key to air power, General Rockwell told me. Okay, Marty.
Really informative, and this should get out more. Let me start at the end then with the thing that's been most controversial internationally and domestically there, the B'Tselem report and the assumption that the attacks on the civilian apartment buildings, in particular in Gaza, which were anticipated to and did result in hundreds of civilian casualties, could not possibly have been proportionate to the anticipated military advantage. So a lot of the critics of the IDF assume that's because the IDF is discounting the civilian lives because Hamas is responsible for them being there. Your report is that that's not right.
I didn't even get a scintilla of a hint of this. On the other hand, remember, proportionality is about military advantage as well. So although they assess collateral damage in the same way that General Rockwell would, military advantage, whoa, huge.
Right, okay, so then it seems implausible that hundreds of anticipated civilian casualties could be proportional to the killing of one Hamas operative who happens to be using the building or even just living in the building, and we need to get that person, or maybe the building's being used for that, particularly when there's very little anticipated civilian damage that will, in Israel, if that person is not taken out. So it was your last slide that was quite striking, that in making the military advantage calculation, this seems to be very important. They're assuming that the missiles will strike and kill many civilians in Israel,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
How do they justify that? Because in fact it won't.
The military advantage that they calculated is that rocket will get through and will hit an urban area. That's their calculation.
That's not anticipated. They anticipate that it won't get through.
I'm telling you what, I'm only reporting.
Okay, so that seems like a pretty huge thing.
I will tell you, I was the guy that kept saying, are you sure Iron Dome doesn't affect not the proportionality calculation, but rather the military advantage calculation?
Right.
And they were pretty hard over. I don't know if they'll stand by that position when we send the report back.
At the very least, that really helps to explain explain why there's this disconnect between the critics and the IDF, is the IDF is assuming a much higher military advantage
That's right.
in these strikes than anyone
Right.
thinks. Okay, that's really
That's
helpful.
exactly right. Although, I would hasten to add, you have 5,000 strikes in an urban area, 5,000 strikes in an urban area. I thought they had pretty low collateral damage, the overall assessment. For me, it's the military. In other words, their strikes are very surgical. The argument that Israeli strikes are not surgical, that's absolute nonsense. But the proportionality analysis thing caused me to hesitate. And in the report, I've already written that part. I find this unusual. But I'm going to send it to the IDF and say, are you sure this is how you do this? Because I'm going to put this out as your position. Do you have a question?
I do. I was trying to get that microphone.
Okay.
Mike, this is on your assessment and your impressions and the role of the lawyer in this whole process. And the fact that the MAG is not part of the team, not viewed as part of the team.
Right.
Now, you had, of course, it's because they don't work for the commander. Right. And that would have to be the main factor.
Right.
You have grown up in a system where you worked for commanders. Mm-hmm. And if I can recall correctly, you weren't shy about offering an opinion whether that commander liked it or not. Mm-hmm. You've looked at the Israeli system. Would the Israeli MAGs be better, more effective, or less effective if they worked for the commander and were early and in part of that team? A little bit loaded,
Yeah,
but
it
you
is.
see where I'm wondering about this. And I know it's an unfair thing to drive the impression to, and it's hard without all the information, but it's a unity command issue.
So I was very impressed with the quality of the legal advice that they gave. It was sophisticated in the extreme. In fact, one of your officers who remained nameless recently was at a conference and said something where I went, I don't think that's right. And the Israeli just jumped on her and said, that's not right, And so they're very, very good. But I felt, and so did Major Miriam, who has a lot of operational experience, like everyone wearing an Army uniform in the room. We both felt that it would probably be more effective if you were part of the team. You have to have the courage to speak truth to power. But as long as you have that courage, then the boss is going to confide in you, and the boss is going to say, I'm struggling with this. I was struck to the extent to which a commander would say, listen, I got it. I got it. I don't need the lawyer. Today, no American commander would say this. No American commander that would go anywhere in the military would ever say this. So I find the American approach to be better, but, I'm a God-fearing American, so.
With that, I'm afraid we really are. But here's the good news. Professor Schmitt's going to be with us through this evening.
And tomorrow.
And tomorrow.
Unless it
I was
snows.
corrected on the book, but I want to get it all right. And please be sure to address his questions, or your questions with him. I'm sure he'd be glad to entertain them, because I have about 10 of them, Mike, that I want to ask you. Thank you very much. We are going to be on break until 10 o'clock, but we are going to start. And we are going to start precisely at 10 o'clock.
I mean,